someone who might be going through a similar workflow might run into a couple of issues. If you look at any no-code tools, they do provide you with the ability to build something really quickly. You can really quickly get to an MVP, maybe in 10, 15 minutes, but there are different challenges. For example, when you're trying to upload research papers or any kind of knowledge base, you might not have the scalability or customizability in the what if instead of like maybe 5 or 10 research papers, you want to upload millions of research papers for your organizations or any PDF documents or any other kind of documents? Maybe you want to build like Array or Spark-based pipelines for that. You want custom control, you want custom pre-processing scripts. And this is a traditional cycle where you are trying to move things from a POC to production. You might run into these kind of issues. And also, you might want to use your fine-tuned embedding model because your domain might be too niche, and you might want to use a local embedding model in that specific scenario. Most of these no-code tools do not provide an option like that. And that also is true for, let's say, an LLM that you want to use at scale. Having said that, there are a couple of other issues when it comes to customizability and control over your whole system that you can run into when you're building a solution using these no-code tools. Considering that this is what we, in our hypothetical example, also observed, when it comes to moving from the first phase where we hacked around a solution in 10, 15 minutes, gathered some user feedback, either showing this to a user or just providing it a couple of prompts and seeing where this is failing, we can learn a lot of things from there, like which part of my workflow is the core issue, because there might be multiple pieces that are wrong. And then we can iteratively work on fixing that. And when we start implementation, there are a couple of questions that we have to ask ourselves, like which libraries do we want to use for implementation? What model do I use for my implementation? Is the workflow that I have implemented in Dify over here good enough, or do I need to change this workflow to something else? Some of you might have seen articles like these from Anthropic, where they provided a good distinction between different kinds of workflows in generative AI applications. You can have a very simple workflow where you're passing an input to an LLM and you're getting a response. You have a couple of tools. You can have a chain where your output from one LLM goes to next LLM. There could be routers deciding the flow, and the router can be a static rule that you have set, or it could be an LLM in itself. And they're like agentic workflows. But my principle is that you should always start with something simple and then make it more incrementally complex. Using that, let's say we have this workflow that started with, we should not just in the implementation phase decide to revamp it unless that's like absolutely necessary. We should start to make incremental changes to this kind of workflow. And then depending on which step we choose next, do we want to add more steps in the workflow? Like maybe one LLM is not able to handle all the context. We want to divide it to 2 different LLMs, or we want to separate our retrieval into 2 different phases. There can be multiple different functional blocks that can appear in our workflow. Again, like in our example, that means document parsing, embedding models that we have, retrieval, answer generation, summarization. In future, when we'll have, let's say, a text-to-voice feature as well, that could be another functional building block that might appear in our complete workflow. We need to first decide what are these functional blocks and what our workflow looks like. And that is going to be key for us to decide which tools and libraries actually support that. For example, if your entire workflow is just a chain of LLM calls, using library like Swarm or Crew AI might be an overkill, and vice versa. For effectively selecting libraries, there are a couple of considerations that we have added here. How do we select libraries? Or how do we select tools for different components like orchestration and embedded retrieval and like whatnot? There are lots of libraries out there, and we don't want to say that use this versus that. And I think there are lots of decision factors. If you have prior experience with a certain library, what's the developer community around that library looks like? Does that library have good enough documentation? And then this is from a study from Turing, where they're comparing different popular open source libraries that are out there for agent orchestration, like LangGraph, LlamaIndex. You might not be familiar with Python. You might be familiar with JavaScript. So you can select libraries that support JavaScript as a language. If you're starting to build your solution, you might not want to implement tools of your own. You might want to look at libraries that provide you a lot of those tools. There are different design, different considerations that you need to think about when you're thinking what libraries or tools you need to use for different purposes. And then this was just for orchestration, but you can apply similar methodology when it comes to choosing libraries for other tasks.